Good afternoon. Thank you for spending time with us on a very important topic of cyber resiliency and IoT security. And our session is slightly different than the previous one, and our session is going to actually cover a broad spectrum of cyber resiliency. And before we start, I wanted to make an introduction. My name is Jing Dijang Chen. I'm General Manager of Global Cybersecurity Strategy at Microsoft Corporation. I've been spending the last more than 20 years in the software industry, so I'll be sharing my perspective from industry perspective. We also have Ron Russ, who's a fellow at the NIST, and his focus areas including information security, system security engineering, and risk management. Dr. Russ leads the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, that's a FISMA, implementation project, which includes the development of security standards and guidelines for the federal government, contractors, and the United States critical infrastructure. Dr. Russ also leads the Joint Task Force and interagency partnership with the Department of Defense, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, U.S. Intelligence Community, and the Committee on National Security Systems, with responsibility for the development of the Unified Information Security Framework for the federal government and its contractors. We also have another fellow industry representative here, Claudio Caimi, who works as a senior program manager at the IT security team at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise based in Italy. He holds a long track of experience dealing with research and innovation, marketing, sales, and program management. He holds a master's degree in computer science and certificate in marketing and PMI. Claudio has 10 years experience on Horizon 2020 activities as coordinators, program manager, and as HPE internal exploitation manager of project results. We also have Nicholas Ferguson, who's the digital communication strategist and the senior project manager at Trust IT Services. Nicholas is the coordinator of Cyberwatch EU, the European Observatory of Research and Innovation in the field of cybersecurity and privacy. I'll let him explain more about his project. So before we get into the panel, I just wanted to set the stage of what we will be about to discuss. One of the things that people are probably heard cyber resiliency in many contexts, and I just want to give you how NIST defines cyber resiliency. Cyber resiliency is the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use or are enabled by cyber resources. It's pretty lengthy description, but you get the idea. So today we are covering a couple of things. One is that we want to talk about how, from our software industry perspective, how we see resiliency built into the products and services. And then we have Ron to talk about how United States, from government perspective, to drive the cyber resiliency initiative. And then we also have a broader discussion about how manufacturing sector to look at how the utility and CIP perspective. And also last, we will have a more of about EU NIS initiative and what's the impact to the industry in the member states. So Ron, would you please start yours? Thank you.
Thank you, Jing. I appreciate everybody coming today. And I want to start out, I was telling Jing, I'm going to try to paint a picture for everybody as far as why do we care about resiliency. We have a very wide spectrum of people here today. We have some engineers and scientists and policy people, but yet there's a common theme that all of us can rally around to understand why cyber resiliency is important. And I think you have to start with where we are today in the technology life cycle. It's really an amazing time to live in today because we're all taking advantage of the greatest technological revolution, computers and software and all these great things that are represented in IoT now, the smart city, smart dishwasher, smart refrigerators. The common denominator is that we are using these computers to the maximum extent, and we're pushing the computers, I call it pushing it to the edge, where the edge can be anything from a power plant to a weapon system in the Defense Department, to your refrigerator, your dishwasher, to a pacemaker in your chest. And what makes resiliency important for every one of us, whether you're a consumer in your home or whether you're a part of the defense industry or the power plant, industrial, the energy sector, healthcare sector, is that those computers, we're totally dependent on those computers to do everything we do. Every mission, every business today, total dependence on those computers, and they have to be dependable. And one of the things we've learned over the past couple of decades, and the folks I work with, we get access to lots of threat data. We know where these cyber attacks are coming from. We know who is initiating, and we can tell who's being targeted, and we can see the damage being done. Either adversaries are trying to bring down our capability, like bringing down the air traffic control system or bringing down a power plant, or they put malicious code into your system and you're operational, but you're losing intellectual property. They're stealing national secrets, intellectual property. That could be the next generation automobile designs from one of our big automobile manufacturers. The point is, this is a worldwide problem. Anybody that uses computers has the same issue. The software and the firmware that drives the computers, the heart, the nerve center, it's totally vulnerable because the way we build the systems today. And that's been a fundamental change in the way NIST is starting to address cybersecurity. For years, we depended on having standards and guidelines that make our systems more penetration resistant, stopping the bad guys from getting in. But we know even when we do everything right today, about 10% of the time, the high-end adversaries, nation-state level adversaries with lots of money, lots of expertise are going to get into your perimeter, and they're going to plant themselves deep in your systems. So how do we address this problem? Well, we have to start looking at why we have the problem that we have. And it really comes down to a very simple, you can tell this story very simply. We have too much complexity. And you can see it every day on your smartphones and your tablets. All of us are doing the same thing. We're downloading hundreds of applications for that smartphone and the tablet. And this is about science and engineering. You know, everybody here gets on airplanes, you know, and they travel and they cross bridges, but you have a high degree of confidence in most cases you're going to get to your destination, whether it's crossing a bridge or getting in an airplane. And why is that? Well, because we use literally decades of science and engineering in building bridges and airplanes, and they don't fail very often. But we have the same decades of experience in building trusted software and trusted code, but we just don't do that because there's a different dynamic in the world of information technology. Our industry are pushing out applications, and consumers demand more functionality. They want more of the stuff. And that builds an attack surface. Complexity equals attack surface. So when you look at your phone or any device, a laptop or a tablet or a power plant, it's all the same. There's applications, there's middleware, there's an operating system which controls everything, and there's firmware, and you're getting down to the hardware, the integrated circuits, the actual computers. And all of these things are connected. And it's not bad enough, it's just the computers. Now we're going into cyber physical systems. Those computers are controlling the braking system in your automobile. They're in power plants. And those same vulnerabilities that had been there for years are now deep into our critical infrastructure, and that's inherently where the problem is. So NIST is trying to turn the tide on this, and we've developed a series of engineering guidelines. We're trying to attack this problem for how do we build better software and firmware and systems. And we use an IEEE ISO standard. It's IEEE ISO 15288 systems engineering standard. And we basically integrated across all 30 processes in that international standard. What are the best practices in building security into the life cycle? So industry can help us deliver products to consumers that are more secure. And we're extending that now into the world of privacy because privacy and security are in the same discussion. You've got to have a bed of security in order to have good privacy for unauthorized disclosure. So our second guideline in the series is on cyber resiliency. We not only try to build better systems, but what do you do with the 95% of those systems that you have today? They're legacy. You have what you have. Well, we've got a whole new set of guidelines in 800-160 on how to make those legacy systems, the ones that are on-premise today, more resilient? We assume the bad guys are already in your system. How do you limit the damage they can do and survive to tomorrow to make sure you can continue to carry on your mission and your business? That's what the guideline's all about, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about it a little bit later. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Claudia.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Claudio Caimi from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Italy, and I'm representing here the Aegis project that is, so that is next. This one?
Yeah.
Okay, that is Horizon 2020 funded a project that lasts 2 years and is coordination support action with other 2 projects, that is Unity and that is Europe and Japan collaboration, and Cyberwatch, then we have here a representative. So the scope is to streamline the cooperation in cybersecurity in between Europe and US, and the main partner are here the coordinator that in Mark Europe, the CNR from Italy, the Waterford Institute, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and 3 American, that is the European Chamber of Commerce, that we have the representative here, Camille Saylor. We have the Previdence Group with Dan Caprio, that was a panelist this morning, and the Rutger University. So that is what we do in Italy in the security team. So we take care of security and cybersecurity in a broad spectrum, providing consultancy to our customer. And so jumping immediately to what is the IoT landscape. So I was said before in the previous section, we have a new world made of sensor actuator that change our lifestyle. And our experience is up to now connecting to the artificial intelligence. Most customers use the old system just to get information and not using it in a proper way. So what we are doing to our customer are to convince them to use it for preemptive action and prescriptive action, because you get the most benefit from using all these complex systems. And so firms up to now in our view embark in digital transformation, where IoT is a big part, for 3 main reasons: to get competitive advantage, to improve customer experience, and to increase operational efficiency. And our vertical application, our area are considered from the IoT use because we are smart home, smart city, and SCADA in particular, where legacy systems are. And so from a European view, our estimation, if manufacturing up to now is the most using this new technology, followed by transportation and utility, retail, and health provider and government at the end. So all the industrial system is using the IoT, is considering to use the IoT landscape. But there's many consequences where you use an IoT system in your environment, because first, you have the connection between cyber and physical that cause immediate reaction in safety. So you don't have to care anymore only to say security and privacy in the cyber world, but you immediately have impact in the safety. And at the same time, because everything is built upon legacy system, you are open the old system that maybe were close and not connected to the world to new threats because we are connected to the internet. So you have to consider also this as a new aspect. And as been said before by my colleague, the real fact that you have a complex system, very complex, because we have sensor, actuator made from different manufacturers. And because they consider the cost up to now, security is not considered as a main factor. So they have very low capacity, very low memory. So all security aspects, is very difficult to retrofit the security that you have to use up to now in the new world. So you have to adapt to new model. For example, is very used big data, artificial intelligence to monitor your system. So you have to use new capacity for considering how to maintain secure your environment. And the main problem is how to stay on top of security update. That is one of the main challenges, because if you look to the recent mail attack, like WannaCry, it was not so a smart attack. It was based because it was succeeded because there was no updated software. You don't have patch your old software. That's why, because legacy systems are based on old Microsoft Windows NT, and so the main problem is if you update your operating system, your application doesn't work anymore. So the company are in this stack in the middle. So either do update the operating system, everything doesn't work anymore, or they run the risk to have threatened by a cyber attack. So the first thing you have to create is a baseline. So don't consider go too much in high level to provide security. You have to define a baseline. The baseline first is to have your system up to date. And that has many consequences because you have to have life cycles for your entire system. You have to consider that you are considering a holistic system, not a single pieces. So you have everything to have up to date. The application, the operating system, and whatever. Because if you don't make an update on your system, you're immediately vulnerable. And for example, and also you have to shift security left. What is shift security left? Means you don't have to apply security after something happened. You have to start from the beginning. So security by design, security by default. So you have to create your system that is secure from the beginning. You have to provide testing, commissioner, and everything has to be done in the right way. And another failure is a lack of competence, because many IT practitioners don't have so much knowledge about cybersecurity. So your developer, your operator of the system have a lot of knowledge about the system, but doesn't have so much competence. So you have to invest, everyone has to invest in having along with the IT competence specific for your field. You are an operator, you are an application developer, you have to have security in your skill, because providing an application free of bugs that has run through a security check, static or dynamic, is a must. Okay? So Europe is taking many steps. The European Union, considering the complexity of agency, institution, the European Parliament, is taking many. So we have, first of all, we have ENISA, that is a network information security agency, that is put in top of cybersecurity. His duty is to provide to the member state consultancy, to the industry, to provide, and is very active. So is the reference point. Then we have many other, like the Computer Security Incident Response Team, the European Cybercrime Center that is below the Europol agency, European Defense Agency, and many other. And we also like to mention the JCAT, because the JCAT is a joint cybercrime action task force between all these entities and many other in US, Canada, and some other. Also, the European Parliament and the European Commission has released many related policy that we have considered here. Maybe I don't mention all of them because many have been mentioned before, like the Digital Single Market, the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation, and maybe I can mention the last one, that is a document provided by the ENISA, that is Resilience, Deterrence, and Defense. That is a study. No, sorry, I was mentioning the last. I want to mention the last one, that is recommendation for IoT. So ENISA make a thorough study about IoT, providing a lot of defining what I said before, a baseline for applying security in specific in the energy and the market. Okay, maybe I can stop here.
Thank you. Nick.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the PICASSO project for inviting us today at this lovely centre. So my name's Nick Ferguson and I'm a Senior Project Manager at Trust IT Services, and I am the coordinator of a project which Claudia just mentioned called Cyberwatch EU. And today I'll talk a little bit about cyberwatching and the European NIST directive. So just very quickly, cyberwatching focuses on cybersecurity and privacy, and basically looks at creating an observatory of what's happening in Europe from a research and innovation point of view, both through European funded projects, nationally funded projects, and regionally funded projects. And one of the things that we look at is, of course, policy, and working with projects such as PICASSO, such as AGIS and eUnity on European policy regarding cybersecurity, and also international policy aspects. So we've talked a lot today, and I really like Ron's introduction about the importance of digital infrastructure in our everyday lives. You know, just getting here today. I'm based in Italy, but I travelled by plane, and I got here safely. Everything's okay. I've been using my credit card here, but if something did go wrong, then I'd be stranded here with no money, which wouldn't be too bad because it's a very nice place. However, there's an increased reliance on digital infrastructure, and an increased awareness that cybersecurity is extremely important. It's been mentioned all morning and all day, basically. It'll be continued to be mentioned throughout the event, I'm sure. Cyber attacks are happening all the time. There's loads of statistics about this. 4,000 ransomware attacks in Europe every day, apparently. The economic cost has increased in Europe fivefold since 2013 and will continue to quadruple by 2021. So there's massive amounts of economic impact, both for companies, for governments, and also for us as citizens. So, and it can also affect critical infrastructures. As Ron said, you know, whole systems can be brought down, company secrets can be stolen, etc. This affects not just one country, it affects everybody. So across Europe, you know, you take the WannaCry attack, which Claudio mentioned, this you know, happened in the UK, but the impact potentially wasn't just on the UK, it was on other countries. And this is where the NIST directive comes in. And WannaCry is an example of how the UK started to implement the structure and work on the structure that the NIST directive puts in place. There's currently fragmentation across Europe, and we've talked about fragmentation also with the internationally. In Europe, we have the big challenge of the fact that we have 28 countries, soon to be 27. We speak 24 different languages, and we have 40 different borders. So this is a real problem. Thank you, Jing, for mentioning the definition of cyber resilience. So I'll not go through that. How does Europe approach this issue? Well, it brings in the NIST directive, the Network Information Security Directive, which looks at three main objectives: to increase collaboration between member states in Europe, to get each country to put in a national cybersecurity strategy, and also to have national supervision of critical infrastructures. So critical infrastructures you know, include health, include transport, include energy. It was very interesting to hear the session just before on the energy sector. Utilities, food, lots of different things are critical infrastructures or essential services. So as I said, three objectives. Firstly, from a European and perhaps a long-term objective, trying to get countries to work together and to cooperate, both on a planning point of view, so what to do as a union in the case of a cyber attack on critical infrastructure, the setting up of incident report teams on a national basis. So these are called CISRITs, and they're basically, if an attack takes place, then organizations should report to them, and these organizations, incident report teams can help a company or an organization to deal with the attack. And the attacks need to be reported, basically, so there's a kind of ladder of information exchange, and I think information exchange is a vital thing to say here, across nationally and across Europe as a whole. Now, the law, the directive is being transposed by each country so it's come into force basically since the 9th of May. As I said, on a national basis, countries have to get a cybersecurity national policy in place, and these incident report teams on a national basis and contact points, etc. The implications are also very clear for operators of essential services and also digital service providers. So they have to guarantee a number of things. They have to guarantee that they have security of information, of systems, and of facilities. They can handle effectively incidents. They have a strategy for business continuity so that the services stay up, they don't go down, even during an attack. They have to monitor and audit things effectively. And they have to try to use international standards to prove that they are complying with their obligations. And they have to react and report an attack. to actually report an attack without due delay. So I believe this is within 72 hours. And normally companies take a wee bit longer to realize that they've had an incident than 72 hours. There was interesting statistics about this, that it takes a lot longer for companies to realize they've been attacked. So it's a real culture change as well for companies who or organizations, also, who maybe cover up an attack because they realize that it's going to affect their reputation. But now if they cover it up and they get found out, which they will do, I presume, then they'll not only have a bad reputation, but they'll get a whopping great big fine as well. The directive isn't a regulation like the GDPR, so it's countries enact the law on a national basis. They identify, at the moment, the countries are identifying what the essential services are, so this can mean different countries identify different essential services. The fines can be different as well across countries, across member states in the EU, but the fines are expected to be, as with the GDPR, they're expected to be very high as well. I think the UK, $22 million is like the top end. So basically it comes in a time where you also have the much more highly publicized GDPR, which we talked about this morning. But the NIST directive is pretty important by itself, and it's kind of flown under the radar of many people because obviously it affects quite one particular sector of essential services. So, so when you have this type of change in regulations and in directives, then it kind of has a knock-on effect to what happens in research programs. The reason why I'm here is for the Cyberwatching .eu project, where we are observing what's happening in European, national, and then regional funded projects, and creating an observatory to monitor what is happening. As with cyber resilience and on the national implementation of cybersecurity strategies, there's quite a bit of fragmentation in Europe. It's the same with research projects, who perhaps often work in silos, don't really work together enough. So our project tries to create groupings of projects or clusters, and tries to get projects to give them a platform to actually work together, reuse results, and also more opportunities for exploitation as well through the creation of a marketplace. So trying to basically give more visibility to the results of projects, mature projects, and take them closer to end users, and particularly small businesses who could benefit from these results, in particular in relation to the NIST directive and GDPR. We've created a catalogue of services. I brought 30 of those over with me, and this is the last one. So if you want it, you have to come and ask me and give me a card, etc. But it'd be great. There's 48 service officers of projects who basically we've tried to get them to write about the results in a more market-facing way, so that, because obviously with research projects there's a technical focus which isn't always easy to understand if you're not a technical person. I'd just very quickly like to highlight 4 projects which actually focus on providing services or tools or software which look at compliance with this directive. So they provide services for critical infrastructure, for operators of essential services or critical infrastructure. So right from the Hermeneutic project looks at assessing the economic impact of an attack, so that executives, CIOs can plan better how to invest in cybersecurity and monitor things. And then you've got projects which look also at how to handle incidents and how to do this efficiently and keep the services running. And that's the essential part of this. So these projects, finish in 2019, 2020. So again, they're looking for people to test and validate and use their results, basically. So thank you very much. We also have a survey, which there's a link there, and the slides will be available. And it'd be great if you could complete the survey, which looks at policy issues and certification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. So I would like to share something about the IoT resiliency and the effort as more basic, at a more fundamental level. As Ron has pointed out, everything runs on software. Unfortunately, today is not, the software wasn't always written by software companies. The hardware companies, and especially smaller, medium companies, are writing software. So there are issues related to if these devices out there are all designed with security in mind. Many of them have no security today. So one of the wake-up call we have seen is back in October 2016 is one, there's a major DDoS attack against DNS server run by DNY company, which is providing the backbone service for internet. And the attack was facilitated with botnets that are made up of very low-cost devices, including civilian cameras, which is made somewhere outside. But anyway, none of these devices have security or adequate security in place. So that should serve as a wake-up call to all of us. So I just wanted to give you a sense where we are in terms of addressing cyber resiliency and IoT security from industry where I'm from. One of the things what you see is that internet itself was not designed with security in mind in the first place. So as these very large-scale globally connected networks, and you have more and more and more devices loaded onto this network with no security, we're going to looking at very chaotic and very vulnerable environment. So that by itself should make people concerned about this whole, the future of computing when we build, nothing is on the solid ground. And also if you think about enterprise or government for that matter, we normally operate in the environment. We have known devices. We know how many PC we have, or hopefully the company knows how many devices they have. So these are what we call known devices that has ownership, whether it's a user dedicated to that device or the IT professional dedicated to that. So with the known environment, when something happened, it's normally easier to detect. It is easier to protect. Easier to recover as well. But for the world of IoT, many devices we see in both private and public spaces, you actually don't know who actually is the owner, right? There are many devices that you experience or interact with. You have no idea if these devices are already being tampered or they already have malwares running and collecting information. So that's really what we're looking at, is the device today does not have clear ownership. We call them unknown devices, or there's no one to look after these devices when something does happen. So what we are advocating is to actually looking at all the device makers to make them, to take a priority to say, every device you ship, you need to consider what happens when there's an attack on your device. You need to be responsible not only when you release the device, but throughout the life cycle of this device. So the security needs to go from end to end. There are two steps involved in tampering or malware. One is that the code corrupts what's running on your device. And the second step is when you actually provide update, that malware still functioning, so still there. So many of the people who actually thought, okay, you have devices, there's something's wrong, I reboot it, and you think it's fixed it, it's still there. So that's what's very concerning, is that we need to have a forced recovery. So just based on the NIST cybersecurity framework, and if we look at the concept, the protection, detection, we also want to address another aspect called attestation. Attestation means a device, when you use your company network or any kind of network, there should be a verification of who this device belongs to, whether you have all up-to-date security updates or running the configuration in compliance with your company policy. And if it's not, the network should reject that device to be connected. And I personally had that experience in the past. When you're traveling on the road, you forgot to deploy a patch, and the time you come back, they go like, okay, you no longer have access. So we have to get a special permission, and you call up the IT and say, I need to have that patch deployed in order to be connected. So that's how far you need to go, is to say not all devices should be trusted, and that's a very important concept. So how do you achieve attestation in the world of IoT? Because not everything has human interface. Many of them depend on device-to-device attestation. And so in order to achieve that, we believe every device need to have an ID, which means identifiable. And that ID needs to be protected, and that ID should only be issued by the maker of the device with encryption's protection of that, and it have the certificate to go with it. So these are some of the basic measures that is say, how do you create an identifiable device that is trusted in that regard? And obviously, infection detection is another part, and also recovery is also critical. So in order to detect if there's malware running, you need to have the device not in isolation, but it's actually connect to a service. That service will verify when it does the attestation to say you have something wrong with this device, or you need to check on an update and whatever it is. So that is requiring device-to-device attestation. And finally, the device needs to also have a mechanism in place to have a forced recovery, which means when the device is running on outdated software, or it's infected by malware, or failed to verify itself online management services in a timely manner, and some intervention need to take place. And so there's a lot of mechanism that can be designed in the process how you manage these devices. And we really want to call upon all the device makers to take that responsibility to own the security of the device from the moment you ship the device to the time you basically sunset that device. So one of the potential is that when we look at all these complexity, there's so many devices out there, how do we make it scalable? Fortunately, we have cloud computing. So cloud computing can manage more large quantity of devices, and so cloud-based management services today is already available. For example, my personal cell phone, if I want to use company emails, I have to sign up to the Microsoft Intune service. They will check my device all the time. First of all, they enforce, say, this phone, you need to have a password, right? And in order to access to the company email service, you have to have a second factor authentication. So there's a whole spectrum of things you can enforce through a service, through the cloud. There's also importance of the industry collaboration. We have many new and less experienced device makers out there. They're actually working in very different verticals. They're not always in the IT sector. So what we suggest that there needs to be a close collaboration for the industry, for the more experienced industry players, to help create standards or industry protocols to raise the bar for security and resiliency. And one of the organizations that we belong to is called the Trusted Computing Group, and it's a global industry security standard organization. We do have government liaisons from many key countries and national security agency to be part of that. And so our protocols are being released about, for example, the IoT device, how you create identifier of the IoT devices. There's also a whole spectrum of trusted computing standards that actually make sure that device-to-device attestation can be accomplished, and through certain implementation of the hardware-based security. For example, every Windows device, actually there is a chip. It's called the Trusted Compute TPM module, and that hardware-based, it gives another layer of enforcement of how you can combine both software and hardware security together to ensure a trusted environment. And so there are work that is underway, and but now let me ask some questions to our panelists to get more discussion going on this. And for Ron, what would be the biggest challenge for U.S. to address cyber resiliency at this point of time, if you have any insight into that?
I think the biggest challenge for the U.S. is the same challenge that exists worldwide. It's kind of a recognition that we're operating, our thought process today is one of kinetic space. We think about things in terms of physical world that we live in. And when you look about cybersecurity and cyber in general, it's the opposite of kinetic. Your devices are operating, they're working just fine. The power plant's working just fine, the lights are on. But yet that malicious code could already be buried deep inside your device. In fact, many of you are carrying devices right now that are laced with malicious code. So the challenge is, how do we think in terms of kinetic? There was a Defense Science Board report. You can download this today. It was done in 2013. If you Google Military Cyber Resiliency 2013, you'll get it's a Defense Science Board report. The DoD, our Defense Department, asked the Defense Science Board, could the United States military withstand a massive cyber attack and still defend the country? Pretty important question. And when they came back, they described 6 types of vulnerabilities. I'll just characterize them in 3 layers. There's the known vulnerabilities. These are the ones you deal with every day. Every Tuesday, our big vendors are releasing the patches. Those are known vulnerabilities, ones you know about. But then there's a layer below that that are called zero-day vulnerabilities or zero-day exploits. That's where the adversary knows something about your network or your system that you don't know, and the threat will launch an attack, and they will exploit that vulnerability to cause mission business impact, and there's a likelihood associated with it. The likelihood is 100% today, so you can forget about that probability, 100% likely. Then there's a layer below that. When the advanced persistent threat takes total control of your system or network, it's not that hard to do today. They can create new vulnerabilities in your system you didn't have before. The problem with this is, and you can't fix this by vulnerability detection and scanning, because zero-day vulnerabilities and the ones the adversary creates are totally off your radar. And the only way you can fix those things is to go back and re-engineer and build a stronger, more penetration-resistant, more resilient system. So the analogy I use is automobiles. How did you get cars today that are safe and you trust when you get in and drive? Well, they have seat belts and airbags and steel reinforced doors and all these computers that tell you when you change lanes. That stuff was a result of good, solid engineering and years of science and engineering and physics and mathematics. We just built a safer car for consumers. But yet when it comes to IT, we have a totally different focus. You know, we have a blind spot because your devices appear to be working, but they're really corrupted with malicious code, and the adversary is going to get to decide when to bring down that power plant or when to shut off that medical device. It'll be a time of their choosing and not ours. And that's why our engineering guidelines, we have the standards out there. We have the guidance from NIST. Industry has a lot of these best practices. The question is, as consumers, are you focused on helping them do the right thing? Because as long as we sit around accepting the stuff as if it's the only solution, they're going to keep producing more functions and more stuff that's cool to use that cannot be protected. And that's really the simple side of the story.
Thank you. I also have a question for Claudio. What are your recommendations for both the device manufacturing and the utility sector when it comes to cyber resiliency?
Okay. So cyber resiliency is under the umbrella of business continuity in a sense. So you have to consider through a threat modeling approach which are your assets, which is the value of your asset, which are the vulnerability, which are the threat. And considering this, you have to define a plan, appropriate plan for your business continuity that considers cyber resilience. So suppose you are under an attack and your system goes off You have to consider which is the impact on your business. I will be able to run my business for an hour without connection, without my system working 2 hours, 1 day, 2 days. That's the analysis they have to take. Other consideration is, again, to define a baseline. You don't have to consider a rocket science attack, persistent threat, or spear attack. Create a baseline to protect yourself first. And consider, again, all the life cycle of the whole system, for the complex system or your single product. I have an experience to tell, maybe, referring utility we have that suddenly they have the same problem I mentioned before. They didn't have an update system because they have running a lot of old software, and moving to a next generation of operating system will cause a lot of problem because they are running an utility system. So is in the plan but not currently available. So they were so the solution we found to create a whitelist. So you have to know which software is can run in your system, and so what is acceptable to have in your system running. And suddenly they found a very old malware that is called Configure, that, as far as I know, is the most long life malware existing, because it was discovered in 2007 or 18 and still exists because it's a, and it doesn't spread through internet. They were infected by a removable key. So even though the system is not connecting to the internet, you are protected. If you are using a laptop or any device that from time to time get connected to the internet, we were infected by this malware and was injected in the network. So at the end, it was a very nightmare to find what's going on, because fortunately we have some intrusion detection system that we discovered that something was wrong, and it took a lot of time to find out this. So in a sense, so Internet of Things, a system that runs Internet of Things doesn't have to be infected by the internet. Because your industrial control system, if you're running an old software, are controlling devices that maybe are not having an IP protocol by a private protocol, can be destroyed because your control system send the message. So if you receive the actuator receive a bad message referring to a level of high risk, you can spoil the whole system.
All right. Thank you very much. There's one more question for Nick. So the deadline for NIS is coming up in September this year. What do you think of the readiness from the member state?
So the last deadline was the 9th of May. So countries had to have their national cybersecurity strategies implemented by that date. So I think the main, and then the next deadline is actually November, when the member states have to identify which are the essential services and who are the operators of the essential services and the digital service providers. So I think the main challenge from getting everybody to work together is the fact that there's so many countries. It's a little bit unclear what the status is of the directive at the moment since the 9th of May. So it's unclear what status different countries are at. Clearly, clearly, some countries are more advanced in their national cybersecurity strategies. Others are less advanced. So also the Commission have to be very sensitive to each nation. So it's they can't just come out and say, well, this country's doing very well, this other country's lagging behind. So it's quite a sensitive topic between the member states. But the law is being transposed since the 9th of May. So if you go online, you can see the status from the 4th of May. And it's already interesting to see the status of the different countries. Some of them, on the 4th of May, this was in progress. So the law, or some of them, the law being transposed is in progress. Some of them have the national cybersecurity strategy published. Some of them have identified one single entity who are the incident report teams. Others have got different incident report teams for different sectors. Spain, for example, has one for the public sector, one for the private sector. So it's already quite a variety on that point of view. Some of the same organisation for all the different points of contact. So already there's disparity on that level. But I think it's very important to say that, with 28 different member states, this is a first step towards having a conversation about it and establishing this information flow, so that Europe can respond to an attack as it should do, in a unified way and not in a separate way. And what I read, that WannaCry was an example of this, where the UK had the attack, and they put in motion the different elements of information flow and shared the information with the European other nations, other member states. So, and with Brexit coming up, I had to mention this, didn't I? So with Brexit coming up, all the rhetoric from the politicians, nobody knows what's going to happen. But when you talk about things like immigration, then it's very clear. The UK has a stance on that. When you talk about security, not just cybersecurity, then we all want to be in the same boat and help each other, and it's the same as cybersecurity. The UK wants to be part of, I read anyway, that the UK wants to play and continue this relationship. From a company point of view, though, I think I mentioned before the culture of change in companies and educating staff, so that if a staff member presses something and opens something they shouldn't have opened, then they feel confident that they feel confident they have to report this. They understand the implications for the organisation they're working for, because these big companies can't hide it anymore. They need to report it to the appropriate people.
All right, thank you. I think we still have a little bit of time left for audience question.
I have to admit there's a bit of a Luddite in me, and that comes out whenever I start hearing about all the cyber attacks and cyber threats. So the question is, do you think that there's a danger that we'll start to roll back the clock, and that some people will sort of reduce their use of credit cards and start turning to cash again, or we'll be unplugging our Alexa devices en masse, or this whole research thrust in autonomous vehicles will sort of fizzle out or something? Or are we pretty confident that we can solve these problems and address them to a level of safety and reliability that we feel these are worth the risk?
Yeah, I think the problems are definitely solvable. I mean, we have all of the science, engineering, and the fundamentals to solve the problem. I think we have to look at this massive problem in two different conversations. There's the general IT usage out there with your smartphones and your tablets and things like that. And then there's the computer systems and things, the software that go into critical infrastructure or medical devices. We may have to look at these in two different avenues of solution. I don't really care as much if your smartphone goes down or your tablet goes down, but I do care if my pacemaker fails. So we could apply the really rigorous and foundational cybersecurity and engineering practices for all devices and systems that are going into critical infrastructure. Make them smaller, less complicated, and we know how to do that. It's just that in the general IT space, we keep loading all of this stuff. The Ford F-150, the new truck, has 90 million lines of code in that truck. And I'll guarantee you, there's only a small amount of code that controls the braking system. So let's separate those two things, build things stronger, more penetration resistant, more resilient, where it's critical, and then let everything else go the other way. So you can have the commercial innovation and things that we need, but yet we can turn our best practices on making things safer where they need to be safer and more secure.
So, Ron, Claudio, Nicola, if I think of the discussions that we have had now, we're talking a lot about device security, right? Also, you were talking about Microsoft's device security approach with a separate chip and whatever. So, for me, the question comes also from the network side. So, if I take today's BMW in Europe, it's with a remote starter. It connects, and you have your Vodafone cell phone in your pocket. The BMW motor control connects to the Deutsche Telekom Authentication Center, the AAA center. After it's then authenticated, it goes to the BMW, after the telecom server authentication goes to the BMW server in Munich. Then you have your remote starter that authenticates in Madrid at Telefonica. And then it goes to Zittau in Germany for the whole remote starter database system that is built up there.
Right.
Then you have your Vodafone cell phone in your pocket, and it goes to your AAA server in Ratingen near Düsseldorf, etc. So what I'm saying is, it's very nice talking about the end-to-end security in the devices itself. I think we're just waiting for the next meltdown or whatever to happen on the network side. So if we're having all these authentications and whatever, and you say this car is going to be autonomously or automated such that it drives over an intersection without having traffic lights anymore, what's going to be happening if we have this kind of outdated, old-fashioned network architecture? I'm not even considering the device itself. We have to look at the AAA servers and these kind of things, and where are they now, and how do we sort of remotely locate them into an edge cloud or something that is more secure? And this is something where we really have to do something.
Okay. You have a question, or are we out of time?
I think it's clear that you or the panel should have an opportunity to respond to that. But then I think we need to move on to the panel and continue the discussions about cyber resiliency over cocktails.
Okay. We'll be around then. All right. So are we out of time?
Well, we respond to this, please, if you'd like to.
I can give, I mean, there's a very quick answer. It is a very complicated problem, but I think our engineering guidance document talks about a system of a collection of system elements where it could be a network device, it could be an operating system, a person, a process, a procedure. And when you draw that boundary, each of those elements in that system boundary has some level of trustworthiness. This is where the engineering comes in. There's always going to be trade-offs, and as you described, it's a very complicated world. The idea, though, that you can take a look at this from an architectural and an engineering perspective and make those design decisions. I'm arguing today that we're not doing that. We're just kind of throwing stuff together, holding our breath and hoping for the best. It may never be a perfect world, but we can make it a lot more disciplined to give us greater visibility and transparency into what we're actually using and what our risks really are. Today, risk management is a kind of a crapshoot. We don't even know what risks we're accepting because it's all going below the waterline. It's buried in the hardware and the systems and the complexity you just described. We have to take that first step, more discipline, more structure, and start down the road, even though it's going to be a long road.
Yes. Have it, Mike.
Well, obviously you're very right. And you mentioned some of the things like how do we deal with this or that. What you didn't mention or didn't emphasize is the cheap devices. I mean, for a car, you can invest in security. For a tech, it may be less likely. And the other thing is that it's not a closed society. It's none of our countries are closed at the borders for devices that interact. So whereas I 100% am with you that we need to work on better that, and I see the only way forward is industry taking that responsibility. How do we make sure it's more than wishful thinking? Because we knew the same about privacy, and it took up to the GDPR for companies to really start investing in it. Do we need something like GDPR for cybersecurity?
The NIS directive.
Yeah, it's the directive. I
The
think.
NIS directive is the answer. Also, the European Commission, at least talking for Europe, is taking some steps for example, the Cybersecurity Act.
Where's the GDPR stick?
Sorry?
Where's the GDPR stick?
Yeah. Well, anyway, the Cybersecurity Act is considering to define standard for new product solutions. So, in a way, the new, for the time being, you are right. You are in horrible exposure to attacks. And WannaCry gave a test for what can happen, is with a simple ransomware. And well, anyway, we have a gap to fill up. It takes time, but I'm confident that it takes time because from the European Commission, I see many action like the ENISA. You consider that ENISA have a collaboration with the Agency of Aerospatial Security. Was simulated last month, I suppose, a cyber attack. All the airport of the member state of the United States, of the European Union. And so some steps are taken. Also, the regulation have to take some steps and consider and fill the big divide that exists between the lawmaker and the IT department, let's say. And but yes, we are in a threat situation, but we are taking steps to fill up, and we need to do that, for sure.
If I can just add one thing, I think market forces are very important here. I think cyber resilience, as with the GDPR, everybody knows about the data privacy now. Even my friends who had no interest in this, a few months ago, and they, it's been mentioned before, inundated with emails. I didn't know I was on so many mailing lists, to be honest. And it'll be the same with cyber resilience. It'll be part of what customers expect, maybe not today, but it will be. And companies that don't comply to things like the directive or the GDPR, it's a financial burden perhaps for smaller companies to comply to things like the GDPR. But if they don't comply, then they'll not be able to survive in the market. And customers want to have, customers know a little bit more about data privacy, know more about cybersecurity issues as well. People are getting a little bit more educated about it, and in the end, they'll want the car that they buy, not to drive off the bridge in an opportune moment, or the brakes to suddenly stop working, for example. And it'll be part of what people expect in their products that they buy. So I think market forces, at the end of the day, is what is going to be a big influencer.
Yes, but also your point about devices that are not even made in the domain where you have security controls, it's true. I mean, more than 70% of the world devices are made in Asia. And so what that causes the global awareness and global certification schemes and through procurement. And I agree with what Ron said, that there needs to be a closer look and control about critical infrastructure devices and making sure that the devices are serving for the public, and that has to be strict control. Procurement policy, yes.
Isn't that why we keep talking about devices? Security is a system property. Data control, it's easy, right? You know who the data controller is. If your device operating in the system is implicated in a systemic failure, and it needn't be an attack failure, right? We're not in a two-person zero-sum world, because the cyber resiliency talks about cascade effects. It talks about system effects. So you can't usefully hold single entity responsible. So we talk about the bit that our way of thinking will allow us to deal with, but I don't think that's really where the problem lies. I think the problem, as indicated before, is at the network level, it's at the level of trust and belief in these things. The final thing is, it acts like a tax on the system. We all have to pay a price. The April 2018 update, Microsoft Windows compromised my TPM, lots of people's TPM.
Yes.
We all had to go through this firmware business where we have no.
We have to update,
It takes
yes.
a long, long time.
Yes.
It also, by device attestation, closes off the market, right? If I do something with a Raspberry Pi, how is that going to be locked into a value chain unless I am already locked into the value chain of one large manufacturer? So innovation, competitive vigor, these are the things that we're paying the price for with this security. And the approach of attacking individual insecure elements is a very difficult one. It may simply displace the problem to a zone where we can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So you can't count on IoT devices all to be secure, whatever we do, which means you need to pick it up to a higher level. That was the thinking that was currently developing. So
Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's the problem for liability, because it's not such a huge ecosystem. You have to, sorry?
on system level, not on device level.
Exactly.
Maybe on political level.
As well.
We are in DC after all. I think we're pretty much concluding this panel, and thank you so much for your attention, and we can have additional